Third gear. Rebuilding the old and integrating the new. This phase of the franchise was a return to the spirit of the Fast and the Furious, while adding on the lessons learned from Too Fast, Too Furious and Tokyo Drift. Dom and Brian make triumphant returns to the films and give Fast and Furious a spark missing from the previous two entries in the series. Fast and Furious repeats a lot of the story beats from The Fast and the Furious, to the point that this film could be considered a soft reboot. Following his Miami shenanigans, Brian is again working in law enforcement, having become an FBI agent who specializes in undercover work. Although, if you think about it, Brian botched his first undercover job by letting Dom go, and during his stint in Miami, he went rogue. So it seems like a bad idea to keep sending the guy who goes a little native when he's infiltrating the criminal underworld back into the criminal underworld. We find that Dom, having fled the US to escape criminal prosecution, still robbing trucks with a new crew, Leo and Santos, as well as returning love interest, Letty, and Han, who makes his first chronological appearance here. The big change from The Fast and the Furious is that this time, both Brian and Dom are trying to infiltrate a criminal group. Each has their own motivations, which puts them into conflict with one another. But underneath it is a mutual respect and affection. This film, being a return to basics, is the first film where Brian and Dom will be more akin to friendly rivals and reflections of one another. Brian still represents the law, trying to bring a criminal to justice, while Dom is trying to get revenge for the death of Letty. Spoilers. While these conflicting viewpoints and drives would force these two into a tense bit of conflict as they try to reconcile police work and vigilantism, as well as the limitations of the legal system to deliver what the audience would consider proper justice. The last third of the movie sees what would become a part of the lifeblood of the franchise, teaming up to take down a crime boss. While fast cars would obviously remain a staple, the focus moved away from the racing subculture. There would still be races, and we would of course see beautiful women wearing booty shorts at the starting line. But this was more a nod toward the franchise's roots. Racing became a side hobby, and a fun little segment that the team indulged in rather than plot essential. If racing wasn't the focus, how could cars be utilized in the plot? With sweet, exhilarating chase scenes. And stunts. Fast and Furious being a soft reboot with strong influence from The Fast and the Furious, the car action was relatively grounded. Here's the craziest stuff you'll see in this movie. Now compare that to this.
Fly! Cars don't fly! Oh, shit!
The film would end reinforcing the fact that justice isn't always best achieved through legal means. That's not my take on it, but the film's. At the end of the movie, despite having apprehended the crime boss and bringing him to justice, Dom is still arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Brian, having finally become disillusioned of the legal system and not being more lenient to a guy who helped bring down a drug cartel, finally severs ties, and we cut to 3 cars, presumably going to bust Dom from a prison transport, in classic Fast and Furious car heist style. Cut to credits. As mentioned, the third gear of the Fast and Furious franchise is about finding the proper way to reconcile the old with the new, and finding a new way to move forward under Justin Lin's leadership. And it mostly succeeds. But this film also serves to change certain dynamics and themes from The Fast and the Furious. The Fast and the Furious and Fast and Furious was premised on mirrored but opposing forces coming into conflict and challenging each other and their beliefs. At the end of Fast and Furious, there's no longer conflict between Dom and Brian. If Dom and Brian in The Fast and the Furious, and the majority of Fast and Furious, are Batman and Superman from The Dark Knight Returns, then their relationship, by the end of this film, is that of Batman and Superman from the Super Friends? But we'll discuss the power dynamics of the dual protagonists in the next section. This film also frames our team as heroes in the Robin Hood tradition. They are outlaws, yes, but in a romantic sense of sticking it to those who would abuse their power. Since they are fighting against clear villains rather than morally gray, as was the case in The Fast and the Furious, it allows for more gratuitous violence when battling the enemy. In The Fast and the Furious, depending on the particular perspective from which we are viewing the situation, Dom or Brian, we have a different antagonist. For Brian, the antagonists were technically Dom's crew, and you can't really have Brian kill any of them since he grows attached. For Dom, the antagonists were the truck drivers whom he was robbing, and rival gangs. We can't have Dom kill truck drivers just doing their jobs, as that would paint him squarely as a villain. So the compromise was to kill this third add-on enemy, which was only there to allow the cathartic killing of a bad guy without making Brian or Dom fall into villainy themselves. With these new norms established, we move on to fourth gear, capes and capers. Fast 5 tests the new storytelling status quo for the series moving forward. And to me, it's the best movie in the franchise. It finds a way to integrate everything it learned and then reshape it into a style of movie which was taking off in the early 2000s and is still going strong. The heist flick. Dom, Brian, and Mia, now fugitives from the law and on the run through Central and South America, reunite with Vince, a member of Dom's crew from The Fast and the Furious, who offers them a job boosting cars for some easy cash. The job goes wrong when Dom feels the heist is suspicious. He has Mia take off with a car with a GPS showing the addresses of safe houses containing $100 million belonging to Rios' drug kingpin, Herman Reyes. That's right, folks, we're taking on another drug cartel. After narrowly escaping torture by Reyes' goons, Dom and Brian decide that they're going to rip off Reyes for all that sweet, sweet drug money. To do that, they need to do what every good heist movie does. They need to assemble a crew. Vince, from The Fast and the Furious. Roman and Tej, from Too Fast, Too Furious. Giselle. Leo Santos, from Fast and Furious. And of course, my man Han, from Tokyo Drift. Which, can we just address the fact that Giselle was part of the Braga cartel's inner circle in Fast and Furious? She was made somewhat human in that she helped out Dom, but there's very little chance that she isn't complicit in a lot of cartel violence. They just welcome her in because she has Wonder Woman vibes, I guess? They plan their heist when a new and formidable obstacle arrive. He's so powerful that you can smell what he's cooking. That's right, folks. Fast 5 introduces us to badass American agent Luke Hobbs, played by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. There's some car shenanigans, they gather their equipment, Tyrese's. Hobbs almost foils their plan, only to join the team after Dom earns his respect. Finally, they steal Reyes' money. There's the final car shenanigans and tacit car murder on the part of the team. The bad guy gets his comeuppance. There's a bit of a twist, the team gets the money and lives happily ever after. Fast 5 is a pretty by-the-books heist movie, in the style of the Ocean's and Mission Impossible movies. To be fair, if you're going to try to ape a slick heist flick, those are the two best franchises to copy. You start with a status quo. We get a preliminary heist, something happens during or immediately after the heist which requires an even bigger caper. You assemble your team, each with a unique skill set, some establishing dynamics of the characters and their interactions and personalities, reconnoiter, plan, and gather equipment, a stumble, a readjustment of the plan, the actual caper, and death-defying stunts. Justice is served to the adversary along with a final twist, and the new status quo. Just like the monomyth, they're boilerplate steps to a modern heist movie, and while not as smooth and charming as the Ocean's movie, or as straight-out cool as the Mission Impossible series, it pulls it off competently enough that it becomes the template for the series moving forward. This movie still has our heroes as morally gray, but there's not so much complexity in the battle between the team and Reyes' villainy. Reyes is never made sympathetic, and the Fast team are never really presented as anything other than good despite committing the occasional theft. Arson, possible manslaughter? Racing? Well, that's interesting since there were technically two races which happened in this film. One was just a spur-of-the-moment race by members of the crew, which was more a token acknowledgement of the series' roots. The other? Actually, it's kind of funny. For a franchise that was built around the racing subculture, with exhilarating drag races and girls in booty shorts, Fast 5 subverts. Before subversion became an overused tool to seem deep. Dom and Brian need more cars for their heist, so they decide to join the local race scene and compete for pink slips. Everything starts off like a classic scene from The Fast and the Furious. Beautiful girls, braggadocious men, and lots of cars. Cool music playing, and finally, a guy challenging Dom to a race. Oh yeah, here we go! Dom turns around to the challenger and smiles when, hard cut to Brian driving the newly won car back to the team's hideout. Whereas the race scene with the crew was a nod to the franchise's roots, this scene, or lack thereof, was a fun poke at the fanbase to let them know that the franchise is moving beyond what it used to be, but even still, it was a jest made out of affection. This movie also finally solidified the new power dynamic between our dual protagonists. Until now, the franchise's co-leads were Paul Walker and Vin Diesel respectively. Paul Walker as Brian was our perspective character, which is to say, while Dom was a reflection of Brian, we, the audience, were meant to overlay ourselves and relate to Brian. There's speculation that generic-looking actors and characters are easier for the audience to embody, and while Walker's acting chops certainly got better as the franchise continued, he was just kind of there a lot of the time. Fast 5 finally established that while Brian and Dom's friendship was the core of the series, Vin Diesel, and therefore Dom, was the face. He was the lead character. When a new hiccup in the heist plan came up, it was implied that Dom was the one to think of a solution.
Dom, we gotta move up our timeline.
Yeah, but how? This thing's already been difficult without Wyatt Earp on our asses. If anything, we need more room to breathe.
Roman's right. I think we need to get some fresh air.
He was the one with agency, and all the others were along for the drive. Car puns! Get used to them, or get the hell out! While Fast 5 shifted style quite a bit to fit more solidly into the popular heist genre, there was one more big paradigm shift, which kind of changed the entire way the franchise portrayed its characters and executed its action. It's encapsulated into a single line of dialogue delivered by Hobbs.
You got your underwear on. We find them. We take them as a team and we bring them back. And above all else, we don't ever let them get in the cars.
It's at this point that our characters were no longer human. They became superheroes. The MCU was still in phase 1 during this time, but with Avengers only a year away, superheroes were a huge trend, which the Fast and Furious franchise seems to have jumped on. By telling his men that Dom and the crew were not allowed to get into cars, Hobbs established that once in cars, the crew was virtually unstoppable. And he's right. To the Fast and Furious team, the cars are essentially Iron Man armor. They may get dinged up and need to be changed out every movie, but they can achieve amazing things and keep the driver from dying. From a visual storytelling perspective, what making our characters into invulnerable superheroes does is allows for more balls-to-the-wall action and ridiculous stunts. Stunts like this just weren't gonna cut it anymore. Thus, we get to